last-minute decision in Washington stopped an escalation that many feared would spiral into open war. In the dim conference room of the White House, advisors gathered around a table and watched a clock counting down toward an uncertain deadline. At the center of that room was President Donald Trump, who, in a move that surprised some in his own circle, chose to extend a fragile ceasefire rather than resume the strikes that had been ready to go. He weighed the risks, the intelligence, the unknowns, and for now, he blinked. Pew Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and CIA Director John Ratcliffe sitting with the president, advisors exchanging short, clipped briefings while aides scrolled through satellite imagery and message treaty. AFIC. The lineup alone signaled how high the stakes had become. A presidential team juggling military readiness, diplomatic openings, and the threat that one misstep could unleash Tehran's ability to speak with a single authoritative voice, leaving negotiators with nothing to bargain for and commanders with no way to measure risk. United States intelligence assessments, according to officials briefed in the Oval O, suggested deep fissures within Iran's power structure. In the past, a small circle inside the clerical hierarchy and the security apparatus spoke with consistency and clarity. Now those lines of command looked muddled, and Tehran's public posture, alternating between warning and silence, reflected internal jockeying rather than a unified policy. The U.S. team feared that sending envoys without clarity would amount to a futile exercise in diplomacy, exposing Washington to strategic embarrassment if there was no authorized counterpart to accept or reject terms. At the center of that uncertainty, U.S. officials began pointing to a low-profile figure they named Machtaba Kani. According to the officials, Kani's limited public footprint and reluctance to provide direct guidance had, in their view, slowed decision-making on topics that mattered most: uranium enrichment, declared stockpiles, and the scope of any sanctions relief. Whether that name represented a new power broker, a place, e-holder, or a factional label meant to mask deeper divisions, the result looked the same in Washington: negotiators without a reliable address. Because of the murkiness around that identity, U.S. planning had to assume a range of scenarios rather than a single negotiated outcome. Faced with that informational fog, President Trump made a calculated political and military decision. Rather than order immediate strikes, he extended the ceasefire in ambiguous terms. No fixed end date, no calendar deadline, effectively buying time. It was a pause that gave diplomacy one more chance and at the same time kept the pressure of American military readiness in the background. He made it clear that the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz remained in effect and that the United States was prepared to resume forceful measures should talks collapse. He said he has instructed U.S. forces to maintain a blockade on Iran while remaining prepared for further action if talks fail. That declaration was designated to reshape the bargaining table. The pause would last until Tehran produced what the White House described as a coherent proposal. Research.org, TETP/www.pew/2026/01/29/confidence- in Trump-dips-201/29/confidence-Trump's directives and -plans $UTUM_source equals OpenAI. There are two reasons to read the move as both strategic and risky. For the president, it was a test, a probe to see if Iran's fractured leadership could coalesce, if a negotiable offer could surface, and whether Pakistan's back-channel efforts could produce the necessary break in the diplomatic logjam. For many in his own national security team, it was an anxious gamble. Pull back now, and Iran might simply stall, regroup, and strengthen its positions. Keep up the military pressure, and the region risks immediate escalation with consequences that could ripple across energy markets and global trade. On the Iranian side, the calculus was no less fraught. Tehran has repeatedly framed its response around the economic pressure it faces, arguing that talks cannot progress under conditions it characterizes as economic strangulation. Washington, by contrast, insists on seeing concessions, verifiable steps on the nuclear file, and limits on enrichment before it relaxes pressure. That mutual demand for preconditions has produced a classic deadlock. Neither side wants to appear to blink first, and neither wants to give away leverage without something concrete in return. Meanwhile, regional actors have been working the line between escalation and mediation. Islamabad has been particularly active, with Pakistani intermediation scrambling to serve as a bridge between the two capitals. Figures in Pakistan's leadership reportedly urged the United States to hold back from immediate military action, pressing Tehran to respond and offering to host or facilitate talks. Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and senior officials in Islamabad have been named publicly and privately in outreach efforts, conveying a sense of urgency on de-escalation even as their leverage remains uncertain. The Pakistani role is delicate. They are interlocutors, not guarantors, and their ability to compel a unified response from Tehran is limited by the very divisions the U.S. intelligence community has described. Stardian.com, https://www.theguardian.com/world/2022/4/Mars/03/Shibaz-Sharif-3/Swarn-Minister-as-Prime-Minister-Pike-Scannon ?Mark At sea, the situation has been equally volatile. The Strait of Hormuz, that narrow choke point through which an outsized share of the world's oil and tanker traffic passes, became an instrument of power. Reports out of Tehran suggested that Iran had, at times, asserted tight control over passage, limiting access, and, according to some accounts, attacking vessels that attempted to transit without approval. But other reports and some satellite tracking indicated traffic moving again, a shift from outright denial to regulated permission. That distinction matters. Full closure would be an immediate global economic shock. Regulation, by contrast, allows Tehran to wield influence without provoking the same level of international alarm. It lets Iran show its hand while maintaining plausible deniability about total disruption. Amid all of this, the intelligence picture was peppered with hard facts and softer signals. Imagery analysts track naval formations and logistics corridors. Signals analyst listens for the cadence of military orders. Human assets reported whispers of internal contestation. But what mattered most at the decision point was not perfect certainty. It was the credible fear that any misread could lead to rapidly shifting outcomes. The president's extension was in part driven by the judgment that there were more unknowns than certainties and that the cost of resuming kinetic strikes without clear objectives could be unacceptably high. Those around him expressed a mix of relief and concern. Some add, advisors argue that the extension created breathing room for narrower technical negotiation, an effort to freeze enrichment levels, allow intrusive inspections, and negotiate a staged sanctions relief. Others warn that the pause simply buys time for Iran to reconstitute certain capabilities and reposition assets, a concern rooted in past conflicts where pauses were used for consolidation. Publicly, the administration sought to thread a narrow needle. The president used his platform to make the stakes clear and to signal both firmness and conditional openness. He said the ceasefire will remain in place until Iran's leaders present a coherent proposal and discussions are concluded. That carefully worded line was meant to show the world that the pause was not a retreat, but a conditional truce, a diplomatic interval with an exit ramp if Tehran failed to act. The initiative, the administration kept the blockade in place, seeking to preserve leverage while giving channels of dialogue a chance to burr. See spewresearch.org, page TTP ES:/WWW.pewresearch.org/politics/2026/0/1/2/9/confidence-dash-and-tup-dash-dip-spear-dash and dash plans?mark YouTube_source equals open eye. For diplomats, the list of unresolved issues was long and technical. How much enrichment would Iran be allowed to retain? Where would its existing stockpiles be stored, and who would verify them? What would sanctions relief look like, and on what timetable? Each of those questions carried political baggage and scientific complexity. Negotiators would have to translate nuclear measurements into political concessions and vice versa, while also accounting for regional security concerns from Israel to the Gulf monarchies, all of which were watching closely and worried about the balance of power in the aftermath of any agreement. Back in Tehran, the absence of a clear public negotiating posture allowed multiple internal voices to compete. Hardliners worried that concessions would be a capitulation. Pragmatists argue D for tactical give and take to end sanctions and reintegrate economically. Revolutionary elements weighed messages of resistance against the material needs of the populace. That tension, U.S. officials warned, could mean a negotiated settlement was simply not possible until one faction prevailed or a credible, authoritative voice committed to specific terms. That is why Washington's request was simple and absolute in tone: show us who speaks for Iran, and we will negotiate with them. Until then, the pause would be tested by time, patience, and the chance that the parties might never find a mutual script. Beyond the immediate players, the move rippled through markets and capitals. Oil traders watched the Strait of Hormuz with particular nervousness. Every day that passage remained uncertain, pushed premiums on crude, and drove jittery reactions across global markets. Allies in Europe and the Middle East called for de-escalation and for a clear plan to return to inspections and monitoring. Regional powers engaged their own calculations about whether the interim pause opened an avenue for diplomacy or simply delayed a bigger, inevitable confrontation. The decision also had an unmistakable political dimension at home. The president balanced the domestic cost of military action, the economic shock to energy prices, the human cost of escalation, and the political fallout against the potential strategic gains of a strike. A forced return to conflict would risk dragging the administration into a prolonged campaign with uncertain end states. Extending the ceasefire, by contrast, offered a narrower political benefit. It allowed the White House to claim it had kept the country out of a wider war while holding the line on what it called necessary conditions for peace. Yet the pause is brittle. It depends on a sequence of events that may never materialize. Iran must unify its decision-making or at least identify an authorized interlocutor. Pakistani channels must succeed in P, reducing a credible bridge, and Tehran must present a concrete, verifiable proposal on nuclear issues, all before domestic pressures or external provocations append the process. Any miscalculation, an incident at sea, a rogue attack, or a leaked threat from an empowered faction could snap the fragile calm and force choices back onto the military table. In the end, the president's extension was both a stopgap and a wager. It gave diplomacy room to breathe and intelligence time to continue hard work. It also left the blockade in place, a reminder that leverage had not been surrendered. As the administration frames it, the pause is conditional and reversible, prepared for further action if talks fail. That condition will be the single lever that determines whether the next chapter is negotiation or combat. PewResearch.org, https://w, www.pewresearch.org/politics/2026/01/29/confidence-trump-dips-trump-2 and 2-4--9/confidence-tops-trump-Trump. And plans $UTIM_source=OpenIA. What comes? Next depends on the interplay of internal Iranian politics, the effectiveness of back-channel diplomacy, and the discipline of both capitals to resist the lure of immediate headlines over long-term strategy. For now, the world holds its breath, watching not only what Tehran will do, but whether the fragile pause engineered in Washington will prove to be the beginning of a careful, verifiable unwind of a crisis, or simply a temporary lull before a quicker, more dangerous re-engagement. At sea, in the corridors of power, and in the daily calculations of citizens affected by market shifts and risk, the gamble plays out. Diplomacy, when it works, is slow, technical, and prone to setbacks. When it fails, the escalations are quick and often irreversible. For the moment, one presidential decision has bought time. Whether that time is used to build a bridge or to draw a longer bow depends on choices that still remain to be made by leaders in Tehran, by interlocutors in Islamabad, and by the team in the White House, who must now convert pause into progress without losing control of a very dangerous bargaining table.